A week or so ago, Trump turned up at Davos, not for the first time, but this time with a team of 300 people. And they told the globalists where to get off. And they told the globalists what it was they were going to be building, which is the American system of political economy, based upon the ideas of Alexander Hamilton, and then copied many times over in many parts of the world, but also stymied by the globalists. That's what we're going to be talking about in this video. Hey, Ben, thank you so much for making yourself available.
Yeah, glad to be with you.
Once again, it is Thursday, the 29th of January at 22:48 in the evening, UK time, and you are the president of Promethean Action, and I'll have the links to prometheanaction.com plus your X and your Promethean Action Science channel in the description below, so people should go and check that out. And to everybody who is watching, sharing, commenting, liking, thumbs upping, thank you very, very much for doing that. Please continue to do that. It helps the channel grow as it helps me beat the algorithm. And then I can bring you more and more great shows with great, great guests like Ben, but also Barbara Boyd from Promethean Action, Richard Ingrahams from Promethean Action, Susan Koh-Kinder from Promethean Action, and now the president of Promethean Action, Ben Deniston. Okay, Ben, you and I, we did a video about Trump and nuclear fusion, and I recommend people go and check that out. You know, what is nuclear fusion? Why is Trump's Truth Social purchased a nuclear fusion company? But it all ties into the American system of political economy, which you say, and I hope is the case, that Trump's administration wants to implement and put into place. Now, I've had a few exchanges and debates and discussions with friends and family about the American system of political economy. And a nephew of mine who's studying business studies at one of the prestigious London universities, he kept confusing it with Project for a New American Century, which is a neocon warmongering imperialist project. I'm like, no. This is the American system of political economy. Now, I've been interested in politics for a very, very long time, ever since I was 18, so at least 7 years. And I'd never come across the American system of political economy until, you know, people like Alex Craner and Tom Luongo and your team at Promethean Action started talking about it. So why don't we know about it? And how come we don't know about it?
Very, very clear. It is the biggest threat to empire. The American system was explicitly developed to free the United States from the British Empire. You know, so you can't really even talk about its existence without recognizing that was the historical context, right? The way the empire ran, you know, this global free trade system of Adam Smith, and we can kind of get into some of that maybe a little bit. You know, they wanted all these colonies where they were just basically extracting raw materials. And then in England and the UK, they would ship all the materials there, they would manufacture them into goods, and they'd sell those goods back to the colonies. Right? That was kind of the general economic model, how they had it set up, and that's what the United States was part of, right? So the idea of the American system, the way it originated with Hamilton's work and then his followers, was that we need to have systems that we can implement to protect our own development of our own industry. Right? We can't just be subject to requiring to buy all the goods we need from the British Empire. We need to be able to ensure that we can actually build up our own population, build up our own domestic production of the things we need as a nation. So you have this development of a tariff policy, tariffs, to put a tax on incoming goods that we want to produce here domestically. You had successive policies of national banks, where as a sovereign nation, rather than trying to borrow money from these central banks and these independent financial banks that, you know, have no allegiance to anybody, they're just really used as control mechanisms, we created our own banking institutions that we could utilize to make sure that credit was available to invest in our development as a country. And you had other investments in developing infrastructure and technology in the early phases of the development of America. So that was a history. That was why it was developed, was to ensure that our nation could prosper and develop and free itself from being subject to the British Empire. So the reason you haven't heard of it, and those fundamental things haven't changed. I know that's like deep history, right? That's hundreds of years ago, right? You still have the modern formation of the British Empire today. You still have globalism today. You still have these financial elites that don't want nations to be sovereign, powerful institutions that control their own resources, that control their own development, and that can pose an economic or strategic threat to these globalist forces. They don't like sovereign nations controlling their own destiny and controlling their own development, right? That's kind of like the core fundamental geopolitical issue there. So the American system is rooted around policies that you can enact to ensure that you facilitate and protect your own development as a country.
Right. Okay, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about nations other than the United States that have those characteristics, serving their people, credit going in order to boost development. And they are the ones that are outside the Western central banking system, it seems, or the Western elites, European elites, the City of London and its proxies are hostile to those. So a couple that come to mind, China. I don't know if they've adopted the American system of political economy, but they've definitely used manufacturing to uplift their people. What Putin has done in Russia, like reorganized, like took away the power of the oligarchs, and so in China and in government, and in China and in Russia, the government's more powerful than the oligarchs. Not the case in the West, methinks. The oligarchs are often more powerful or as powerful as the governments. And then the video that I recorded with P.D. Lawton, who's a South African journalist, about Ibrahim Traore and what he's doing, throwing off the yoke of French imperialists. I think they're getting rid of the CFA, the colonial franc, so they can have their own currency, nationalize the gold mines and building their own gold refinery so they can refine the gold that they mine, building tomato factories, encouraging farming, all that sort of development based upon the ideas of Sankara, who was influenced by a French Larouchian. And I think also, Benjamin, and you may not know of this, right? But I just begin to wonder about Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, who was the president of Pakistan, the prime minister of Pakistan in the early 70s, and was displaced in a coup. Oh, and Sankara was shot. And Nkrumah was killed. Another sovereigntist, post-colonial, nationalist leader.
So, yeah, I mean, some of that history I'm certainly not familiar with, but in general, that all is consistent. I mean, that's any time a government's trying to emerge to control their own destiny and fate, that's a direct challenge to these globalist forces, for sure. And the American system is, I think maybe a little more specific, and we can get into what makes it unique. But yeah, I think it's probably within this broader set of the battle of sovereign nations against this effort to have these kind of imperial globalist forces that run roughshod and control over these nations and these territories. I mean, that is kind of what I see as like the real nature of the battle we've been facing.
Okay, so then what are the characteristics of the American system of political economy as expressed or made manifest in the United States?
So it was super exciting to see this address by the U.S. Trade Representative, Jameson Greer, at Davos. Mm-hmm. So he spoke at the USA House, which was like the U.S. presence in Davos. And he gave a whole presentation. I have, outside of the work of just a small number of people, my group included, I've never seen, especially a government official, give that kind of thorough amazing breakdown of the history of the American system. It was really excellent. And he correctly rooted all of it in the work of Alexander Hamilton. And the way I look at it is really the kind of the core point. I like to try and get to the kind of fundamentals as much as possible. I think the core point of the American system, if you look at Hamilton's work, Greer cited this particular writing, the Report on Manufacturers, which Hamilton wrote, which was his argument for why we should support manufacturing, the industrial development of the United States. Because there was actually a debate at the time. Should we just remain as an agricultural nation, or should we try and actually develop domestic industry and manufacturing? And if you read his writings, really the kind of core, I think, that makes it unique is the recognition that wealth and prosperity and growth and development comes ultimately from the ability of the human mind to discover new ways the universe is organized and develop technologies and implement those to increase what he calls the productive powers of labor. That mankind can uniquely do that. That's what makes us unique as a species. The way I look at it, that's like the expression, like economic growth is really the expression of that divine spark that makes mankind distinct and unique from the animals.
Okay.
And that's the root. That's the kind of core. And so then you build around that. That's what you want to facilitate and protect and develop.
Okay. Well, just three inventions that come to mind. Three inventions that chimpanzees, bonobos, dolphins, crows, whales, elephants, none of them have invented. One is the plow. So we invented the plow, and that allowed us to increase food productivity.
Yeah.
And then the other, the bicycle, and I love bicycles, means we can travel quicker. A bicycle, well maintained, will last forever. That increased the distances that we can travel, and also the loads that we can carry using our own power. We're not dependent upon some fuel source other than ourselves. And then, of course, the pen. So I've got an idea, Ben. I'm going to write it down, right? And preserve that idea, that expression. And of course, progress doesn't end with those three inventions. There's, what's the applications that you and I are using to have this conversation, even though we're separated by thousands of miles. And there's the nuclear fusion that you and I talked about in the other video. And there's going to be the inventions to come. So then the principle is that it's that which allows for greater productivity, greater value, and wealth creation. Okay.
Yeah, and that ultimately comes from the human mind and the ability of the human mind to discover how the universe works. That's your ultimate source of wealth, progress. I think there's a direct quote from Hamilton where he basically says, the true measure of the wealth of a nation is not the total mass of gold or silver or precious metals, but it's the rate of development of its productive powers of its labor force. It's the ability of its productive laborers to produce more than they could before, right? And that's a function of technology, and that's your real source that's your ultimate source of wealth, of growth, of development, right? So it's a optimistic, humanistic view of where growth, what economy is really built around. Now you contrast that with Adam Smith, for example, who was like the father of free trade, right? Mm-hmm. And he was a major figure supporting the British Empire at the time. And these are the people we were battling against to free our nation, right, during the American Revolution, right? If you look at his core ideology, I was just preparing some of this for a video that's going to be up on my channel soon. He has this really interesting quote where he says that the fundamental nature of economy comes down to the fact that mankind cannot understand how the universe works. But we have instincts that are like animal instincts, and we seek pleasure and we avoid pain. And that ultimately will create the good that comes. But we can't think about, the bigger picture, why things are happening, what direction society is going in. Those things are too big and too challenging for us to think about and act upon or try and determine. But all you should be doing, the cumulative growth of the economy, all it comes from is each individual seeking pleasure, right? Trying to get as much pleasure as you can and avoiding pain, trying to not experience pain, right? So it's a very like small, it's like you're just an animal, a beast. You're just reacting to your instincts. You're trying to find pleasure. You're trying to avoid uncomfortable situations. And then somehow, through the magic of the marketplace or the invisible hand, as he talks about later, progress comes out of that, right? So that's like the core philosophical, ideological root of this British view. It's really just, you're just an animal following your instincts. And that somehow out of that, society progresses. How, why, who knows? You can't know. It's, God can know, but we're so small and insignificant, we can't know. Right.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And something else, listen to, got things about. One is it doesn't allow for the full expression and potentiality of human ingenuity and creativity. And then when you were talking earlier, I was thinking about how the American system of political economy can't thrive in an environment of censorship. So the Soviet Union, they targeted their money towards production, but it was so censored that you couldn't have the free exchange of ideas. And then the European Union and the UK and Canada and Australia, all these countries that have been captured by proxy of the City of London, the WEF, they, by increasing censorship, are going to stymie their own productivity and their performance because it doesn't allow for ingenuity and creativity to flourish. Very interesting. Yeah. So there's this moral, spiritual dimension to the ASPE.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. And it's not, I should know it's certainly not a socialist or a communist, like, we want the government to direct all aspects of the economy, right? So the government should have a certain role to protect, but you certainly, the core innovation comes from, enterprise of individuals, right? So you want to let people flourish and act free, like you're saying, you can't operate in that kind of a top-down censorship, heavily controlled society, for sure.
Yep. Okay. All right. So what are the other features of the American system of political economy, and why can't it have a shorter name?
I don't know. I didn't name it. Hamilton didn't name it either. It was another follower of his, Henry Clay, I believe, gave it the name the American system.
Right.
But I mean, so the kind of core policy frameworks, again, that get referenced a lot are the tariffs. National banking was a huge part of it for a long time. Investing in domestic improvements like infrastructure and development of industry, ensuring that you're supporting the development of new technologies has always been historically part of it. But I view it as at its most fundamental roots. It's different conceptions about the nature of mankind.
Right.
The British system views mankind as a beast, views mankind as an animal to be controlled. We could go all into this. You have Thomas Malthus, you have all these Malthusians that, they didn't just talk about population reduction, they implemented it. They starved tens of millions of people to death in India during their colonial reign, just horrific levels of mass starvation. In Ireland, you had 1 million people starved to death in Ireland during the potato famine. These were not, things could have been done to stop these, but this was, the British imperial policy that they implemented and they let continue. Those are the views of, this British empire, this British imperial view of man. We're just like cattle, like sheep, to be managed, culled, keep the populations under control. The American system view is rooted in a very different conception that we create progress through our discoveries, through our inventions, through technology, and that mankind is distinct from the animals because of that. And that's the creative spark, the unique potential that we want to facilitate and develop and nourish, because that's the real source of all wealth.
Right. Okay. Now, you said earlier about the government providing infrastructure, building roads and railway networks and stuff. And I suppose there'd be certain other services that the government could also take care of, like defense of the state, defense of the nation. But wouldn't that, how does the government raise revenue? Wouldn't that require taxation?
Yeah, you can use taxation, you can use bonds, you know. Um, the way I look at it is that the most important thing is that you're investing in something that increases your net physical productivity in the end, right? It increases your ability to sustain a higher population, to improve the standard of living, as Hamilton put it, to increase your productive powers of labor, right? That's the real goal you're going after, right? And you can help facilitate that in terms of the money in various ways, and it's been done in various ways. Sometimes you might use certain levels of taxation. Sometimes you use bonds. You could use loans. But I think it's important
the tariffs as well.
Sure, tariffs. Yeah. But ultimately, all money is it's a way to facilitate exchange, right?
Mm.
And in a growing economy, you want to facilitate the exchange with the future, right? If we're going to be at a higher state in the future through these investments, we want to make sure we can allocate the credit to facilitate that process. And I think a lot of the discussion about money and credit these days has gotten so skewed and wacky with all the, stock markets and the way people think about the money being this, kind of magical source of value in and of itself. All it is a way to facilitate, it's the whole, you used to have a stock market because you're investing in a company that's supposedly doing something better and new, right? Now all this trading is like, can I make 0.1% difference? Can I buy at one point and sell 5 minutes later in order to capture that tiny variation in the value change? And it's, what is that? I mean, that's just, all it is just speculation and pushing money around, right?
Yeah. And one way of looking at it, if I can just say, so how the financialization or the financial markets, certainly one aspect of them works is you lend me, I lend you $100. So now I've got $100 loan or a charge on that, right? This is worth $100. And then with 10% interest, $110. And then I'm going to combine that with some other money that I've lent out. That's some other promises I've got. So now I've got 10 of these for $1,100 perspective. And then I'm going to sell that on for $2,000 to somebody else who's going to sell it on for $3,000. So it's this layer upon layer and layer upon layer of nothing, because there's no collateral backing it, and there's no productive capacity backing it.
Right.
It is a Ponzi scheme.
Right.
And then one day it all collapses.
Yeah. My brain starts to melt when you start to get in all those crazy details of all the, financial markets and the derivatives and all the crazy details and all that. But it's No,
Understood.
I mean, take not to just rehash what we talked about before, but take fusion, right?
Yep.
The development of fusion is a massive increase in the ability to provide abundant, cheap electricity, right? But we haven't developed it yet, right? So you have to pay money to build test reactors, to pay for scientists and engineers to, develop the technology, right? So you need to be able to allocate money or credit to ensure that these people can do what they need to do, because when they're able to do it, right, now you've brought society to a completely new level, because now we can, generate vast new amounts of energy at a cheaper cost, right? That's how the American system views monetary policy and credit policy, right? That's how the national bank was intended to be used as it was designed by Hamilton. Right.
Okay.
You're not just trying to gamble money around. You're trying to make sure that things that are actually going to increase, again, the productive powers of labor, the ability of your labor force to produce more of what's needed by society. Right. You want to make sure that you're able to fund those investments.
Right. Okay. Now, who did it really well in the United States?
Well, Trump loves to cite McKinley. And I'm certainly not an expert. We got other people that know a lot more about the history than me.
Mhm.
But President McKinley, around the turn of the century, was certainly a major champion of tariffs in the American system, which led to just a major surplus in revenue and was part of the overall emergence of the United States essentially as a global manufacturing superpower under those policies. So it's worth highlighting his work. Lincoln was a major American system proponent. He helped with the development of the Transcontinental Railroad, which connected our nation for the first time. It was a major infrastructure project that was huge to the development of the country. So he was another definitely key American system figure.
Okay. And JFK, I understand as well. McKinley, I understand at one point the US government had so much money they didn't know what to spend it on.
That's what Trump keeps saying. Yeah, apparently he says that they had to create commissions to figure out what to do with all the money.
Yeah, that they were taking in from tariffs. And then I interviewed Robert Ingrahams from the Promethean Action Team about how the British were behind the assassinations of Lincoln, McKinley, and JFK, because JFK also wanted to put it in. And certainly his vision of a man on the moon is part of that optimistic outlook that characterizes the American system. And what is it that Trump wants to do? And what is it that he's done already?
Well, his big major goal is to bring manufacturing and industry back to the United States. It's a core part of it. And also as part of that, the unleashing of American energy production. I'd say those are two kind of core pillars of what he's trying to do. So, I assume people are aware, the United States under globalization, I'd say, it's kind of been a slow, steady decline really since the end of World War II. In the 1970s, it really picked up more. And at the end of the Cold War, it really accelerated to this point where we had this relationship where, China was just producing everything for us and we were just importing all of it. And U.S. manufacturing and production just got devastated. Left us an incredibly, people talk about the supply lines and how we're vulnerable, right? That we don't produce the medicine we need. We don't produce the goods we need. We're dependent upon other nations. And that's part of it. But also it's just a net negative economic policy. Like we're not producing this idea of a services economy where we're just, highly focused on providing services and not production. The idea that that's actually a sustainable model, I think, is all a fraud. So Trump, to his credit, is saying we got to bring manufacturing back. We got to invest in the American workers. The American workers have been completely screwed by these policies, and we got to invest in. And that's starting to happen. I was just looking at some people covering some of the economic figures, and U.S. manufacturing is beginning to grow. It's not something that just you flip a switch. You don't just turn around and instantly create, a plant that can produce, automobiles or whatever, right? You got to take some time to build that up, but we're starting to see the beginnings of that, where we're actually beginning to produce what we need again. So instead of this model of we just rely on cheap labor abroad, and the goal is just to get things as cheaply as possible, we're going to go back. And that was also a very explicit debate around the American system discussion. Again, going back to the debate between the British free trade system and the American system. And the American system has always been around opposing just exploiting cheap labor, because it recognizes that real growth, real value comes from the ingenuity and the creativity and the development that a developed, educated, skilled population can provide, right? That's where discoveries come from. That's where new technologies come from. That's where new manufacturing capabilities come from, right? If you just try and exploit population as a cheap labor source and you're keeping them suppressed and just providing just for their, the bare minimum needs just to keep them alive so they can, do your production for you, you're not going to get creative development advance out of a population like that, right? If you are ensuring that you're protecting the creative development, the education, the well-being of your population, that's a population that can make discoveries, that can adopt new technologies, right? So, that's this. Trump is leading the way for the United States for reversing just this terrible, insane globalization system that we never should have gone down.
Yeah.
So he's using tariffs and other means to try and ensure we build up a manufacturing base in the country again. And then he also recognizes energy is just a key component for the whole economy. So he's just trying to unleash energy across the board, from fossil fuels to nuclear fission to nuclear fusion, just everything.
Okay, and what about foreign policy? What part does that play? What does that look like under the American system?
To make beneficial trade deals, to try and work with other nations to ensure that we're both benefiting in a process of growth. Not exploitation, not trying to get cheap labor to produce your goods, but try and facilitate the kind of trade that both nations will benefit from. And I think that's what the Trump administration is pursuing on the trade deals.
Okay, and I can get a sense of that perhaps with the oil deal that he's doing with Venezuela, that the proceeds will be shared with China because they were getting oil from Venezuela before, with Venezuela, but also with the United States, which is distinct from the asset stripping model of the IMF, their structural adjustment program, that you want to develop your nation. Well, we're going to lend you money at interest. You're going to pay us back by selling off your assets to Western corporations.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've done a deep dive on all that. Did you read the book? I only read some coverage of it. Confessions of an Economic Hitman.
Yes, many years ago I did read that.
I remember when that came out. That was a big just shining a light on exactly what you described, and it was an intentional model. It's not like they're like, oops, you couldn't pay off your loan, so you have to sell off all your assets. Oh, that's too bad, but it happened. No, that's what they wanted to do. That was the intention, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, Ben, fabulous having you on talking about this, and it's great the work that you at Promethean Action are doing. And I will have links to your X and to your channel, Promethean Action Science, because there's more stuff you're going to be talking about, which is relevant to the American system of political economy. And what I think is really fabulous, I think it's only about a year or so that I've learned about this, maybe 2 years. Alex Craner hinted I didn't know what he was talking about, but I think the conversation is growing and more people all over the world are learning about it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And more people are learning about the perfidy, the all-pervasive perfidy of the City of London and its proxies, and what they're doing to destroy humanity. And more power to your elbow. Everybody who's watched this, thank you so much. Please leave a comment, even if it's like a thumbs up. You can't think of anything, give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down as a comment, and like and share and subscribe. And I look forward to seeing you again. This is Rich and Ben signing out. All the best. Bye-bye.